The bullets hadn't even left the barrels yet. Kane Voss saw them hanging in the air, 3 silver-jacketed projectiles, suspended in the misty neon glow of the lab's emergency lights. The shockwave from the gunfire had barely rippled outward, the muzzle flashes still flickering in frozen time. He could trace the perfect parabola of each round, calculate impact trajectories, anticipate the muscle tensing in the security enforcers' trigger fingers before they had even finished pulling. Time stretched, dissected itself into thin, glass-like layers, each moment stretching into an eternity of hypercomputation. His heartbeat slowed to a crawl. He could feel the sweat forming on his brow, individual droplets crystallizing in midair before his mind registered their movement. And then he moved. To the men firing, it would look like a glitch in reality. One moment Kane was there, standing in their sights, and then he wasn't. The next, they were already dead. Their throats opened in red crescents, their skulls collapsing inward before they even understood they'd been attacked. The Helios Dynamics laboratory was a sterile, chrome nightmare, a labyrinth of cold white lighting and bioengineering tanks filled with embryonic horrors. Now, it was splashed with arterial spray, pooling across the reinforced glass flooring. Klaxons screamed. The entire compound had gone into lockdown. Doors sealing, automated turrets whirring to life in the ceiling alcoves. Kane didn't stop to think. Thinking was automatic now, a constant flood of calculations processed in real time, like 1,000 chessboards playing themselves in his mind. The LUCID WARFARE project had worked too well. The implant in his skull had promised the ultimate battlefield advantage. It was supposed to let soldiers perceive time at 100 times the normal rate, granting them unparalleled reaction speed, tactical foresight, and a mental edge no human opponent could counter. But Helios had underestimated the side effects. Now Kane was trapped inside his own accelerated consciousness, living seconds like minutes, hours like years. He had lost all sense of normal perception. His mind was too fast, his body too slow. The world around him moved in unbearable sluggishness, every moment dissected into infinite frames. And the worst part? He wasn't alone. Behind him, his squad followed. 5 other augmented operatives, their minds fractured, existing in the same fragmented eternity. They had all volunteered for the program. They had all believed in its promise. But the price had been higher than any of them had anticipated. Some of them were already breaking. In the corner of his eye, he saw Jace Tanner, a close combat specialist, normally the first into any fight, shaking, his breathing ragged. His neural augmentation had pushed him beyond the threshold of human perception, and he was seeing things that shouldn't be there. Phantom echoes of past and future, visions of events unfolding before they happened. He clutched his temples, trying to squeeze out the extra data flooding his brain. Lena Core, their sniper, had it worse. She stood frozen, staring at her own hands, watching as the micro-movements of her muscles unraveled in slow, painful clarity. "We need to go. Now." Kane's voice came out distorted, unnatural, like a machine struggling to synthesize human tones. He barely heard himself. Language was a dying concept in this state. Words moved too slow. Conversations felt ancient before they even ended. But the others understood. They had to. Above them, security drones activated, sleek, arachnid-like machines descending from the ceiling, each equipped with zero-lag targeting AI. Helios didn't need human guards anymore. Their drones could process and predict movement faster than any normal human soldier. But Kane and his team weren't normal anymore. The drones fired. The defectors became ghosts. One moment, they were standing in the open. The next, they were moving too fast for the drones to track. Bullets whispered past where they had been, but they had already closed the distance. The first drone shattered into pieces before its processor could register damage, its metallic frame crumpling under an elbow strike. Another was sliced in half by a monoblade, severing its neural link before it could issue a distress signal. Seconds stretched into infinity. The alarms blurred into a singular drone tone, then silence. The floor was littered with machine parts, sparking cables, and the still warm corpses of security personnel. The defectors stood in the centre of it all, breathing in slow, drawn-out intervals, their hyper-accelerated minds adjusting to yet another impossible fight. They were running out of time. Kane lifted his gaze to the reinforced exit doors ahead. Beyond them lay Driftfall's underworld, the only place they could hide. If they stayed in corporate territory, Helios would track them, hunt them, dissect them to understand why they had survived when the others hadn't. The others. He tried not to think about them. The soldiers who hadn't escaped, their minds shattered beyond repair, left drooling in locked containment units deep in the facility's underground research levels. There had been 12 volunteers originally. Only 6 had made it out, and Helios wouldn't let them go so easily. The others could feel it too. Something was coming. Not just more guards, not just more drones. Helios had something worse waiting for them. Kane glanced at Lena, then at Jace, then at the others. They understood. There was no going back. They were no longer human. They had seen too much. And if the world couldn't keep up with them, they would burn it down. They ran. The city did not welcome them. Driftfall stretched out before them like a vast, pulsating carcass, arteries of neon and steel coursing with human refuse, the ghost of civilization hanging in the air like static. Rain fell in sheets, thick and acidic, cutting through the sickly glow of advertisements that floated like digital spectres above the streets. 1,000 corporations promised 1,000 forms of salvation, each one a grift, a subscription model for a better life that no one could afford. They moved through it like after images, flickering between shadows, existing in a state of quantum uncertainty. Normal people, if anyone in this city could still be called normal, moved in slow motion to them, their speech a tedious drawl, their footsteps glacial. A child tossing a coin into a gutter played out in excruciating clarity, the metal disc spinning mid-air for what felt like an eternity before clattering against the pavement. It was unbearable. Kane Voss clenched his jaw, trying to focus on something, anything, that didn't remind him of the infinite slowness of reality. But it was always there, an itch in the back of his mind, 1,000 calculations running at once, every possible movement branching outward in a fractal of probabilities. His brain screamed for stimulation, but all he could do was keep moving forward. The defectors had fled corporate-controlled zones, slipping into the underworld of Driftfall, the maze of abandoned transit tunnels, cybernetic black markets, and warrens of augmented outcasts who lived outside the Nexus grid. There were places the mega-corporations wouldn't go, places where the cameras didn't reach, where even Helios's omnipresent AI struggled to track them. But Helios would find them. They had already seen it happening, patterns forming, drones sweeping in carefully plotted search arcs, subtle changes in pedestrian movement that hinted at invisible data flows directing the hunt. The Triumvirate's grip on the city was absolute, and the defectors were anomalies in the system, glitches that had to be erased. Jace Tanner saw it first, his eyes twitching as his mind rendered the incoming threat before it even arrived. He turned sharply. 2 of them, behind the crowd, moving too smoothly. Synthetic? Kane followed his gaze. The ghosts of the hunt, Helios's new breed of synthetic infiltrators, dressed like civilians, moving like predictive algorithms in flesh. They weren't human, not really. The AI-controlled husk bodies could mimic the way people walked, talked, hesitated at crosswalks, feigned interest in street performers, but the defectors could see the pattern beneath the mask. Everything about them was too calculated. The sway of their arms was too consistent, their gait perfectly even, their eyes flicking in microsecond intervals, measuring probability spaces like living chess computers. And they were already closing in. Jace moved first, faster than thought, twisting past a man selling counterfeit implant chips, slicing his monoblade upward. The first infiltrator's head tilted, not in pain, not in fear, just a recalculation, a desperate attempt to reconfigure its failed strategy. Then it died, cleanly bisected at the throat. The second one had already leapt, too fast for a normal human, too slow for them. Lena Core fired 2 rounds into its skull before it landed. No hesitation, no wasted movement. The synthetic body hit the pavement in a heap of twitching servos, neon reflections dancing across its polished carbon fibre bones. The crowd hadn't even reacted yet. The world was too slow to process what had just happened. Pedestrians still moved in blissful ignorance, locked in the corporate daydream of their nexus-linked existences. By the time the first scream registered, the defectors were already gone. They sprinted through back alleys, vaulting over rusted scaffolding, slipping between collapsing steel barricades where the city had begun to devour itself. There was no destination, only distance. They had to put as much space between themselves and Helios as possible before the drones arrived, before the synthetic kill squads adapted. Because they would adapt. That was the real horror of it. Helios had designed them that way, learning algorithms that consumed combat data at exponential rates, each failed engagement fueling the next iteration, an infinite loop of improvement through death. Next time, the infiltrators would be faster. The defectors needed a plan. Kane forced himself to stop, inhaling slow, steady breaths. It was difficult, suppressing the urge to move, to keep pushing forward into the endless fog of the city. Every instinct told him to never stop, because stopping meant confronting the unbearable weight of time grinding against his mind. The others gathered, their faces twitched with the same unspoken agony, the mental friction of processing reality too quickly, too efficiently, too painfully. "We need blockers," Lena muttered. Her voice came out in clipped static. Words never sounded right anymore. She was right. They needed something to slow their minds down, even temporarily. Helios had built neurolimiters into the implants, safeguards to prevent what was happening to them now, but those had been fried during their escape. That left one option. "The Revenants," Kane said. The others stiffened. It was a terrible idea, but it was the only one they had left. The Revenants were ghosts in the machine, cyber hackers, rogue AIs, augmented outlaws who had rejected the corporate system and built their own underground empire in Driftfall's data tunnels. They had the tech, the expertise, and, most importantly, the means to disable or reprogram neural augmentations. But they didn't do anything for free. And there was always a cost. Jace exhaled sharply. It's that, or burnout. No one disagreed. Kane turned toward the lower city, where the streets grew darker, the Nexus grid weaker, the rules looser. Time was running out. But for them, time was always running out. They moved. The Revenants did not trust them. Kane could see it in the way their eyes flickered too fast beneath bioluminescent augments, processing and cross-referencing them against 1,000 surveillance feeds, looking for inconsistencies, tells, signs of compromise. These were people, if they could still be called that, who had lived too long outside the grid, their minds shaped by GhostNet, by the black market data streams where AI whispered in synthetic tongues. Their bodies were patchwork, a blend of cybernetic modifications grafted over flesh, nerves rewired with aftermarket impulse regulators to make human reaction time irrelevant. They were faster than normal people, but not faster than the defectors. That was why they hadn't been shot on sight. That, and the fact that Kane had something to trade. The meeting took place in a half-submerged sector of the Undercity, a drowned ruin where forgotten subway tunnels had filled with black, chemical-laced water, the remnants of old infrastructure, now hollowed-out data sanctuaries. Everything smelled of wet metal and ozone. Neon graffiti pulsed on rusted walls like electric veins, shifting in response to the frequencies of their voices. Kane could feel the coded transmissions buzzing around him, invisible static in the air, data pulses skimming through old fiber optic lines like trapped ghosts. The Revenant's leader, a woman known only as Six, sat cross-legged on a metal crate, her fingers flickering over an invisible interface, data streams bending to her will through neural commands. She was mostly machine now, chrome replacing bone, optics that saw beyond the visible spectrum, but the way she smirked at Kane was all too human. "You want blockers?" she said. Her voice was like an old recording, slightly distorted, skipping in places. Funny, most people come to us looking for the opposite. Kane didn't flinch. "We need to slow down, enough to function." Six tilted her head, scanning them again, as if seeing them from 1,000 different angles at once. "I read the corporate chatter. Helios wants you bad. That makes you valuable." Kane could already see the angles forming in her mind. The Revenants would never help them out of kindness. There was no kindness in Driftfall. But leverage, that was currency. And right now, they were the most unpredictable variables in the city. Lena spoke before Kane could. "What do you want?" Six smiled, all sharpened teeth and digital interference. Nothing you wouldn't already be willing to do. She sent a data packet to Kane's neural interface, a burst of compressed intel, unzipping itself into coordinates, schematics, security protocols. He saw it all unfold in an instant, absorbed in the space between blinks, a Helios black site, buried beneath one of their research spires, the kind of place that didn't officially exist. "We need something inside that facility," Six said, her voice glitching again. "You get it for us. We give you what you need." Simple dot. It was never simple. Kane could feel the others waiting for his call. He looked at Jace, at Lena, at the rest of them. He didn't need words. They understood. This was the only way out. And so they went to war. The Helios Black Site was an impossible fortress, a monolith of reinforced steel and predictive countermeasures, its defences orchestrated by an AI that had spent years mapping every possible infiltration route, every conceivable attack pattern. It controlled drones that fired before they saw you, sentries that reacted to micro-expressions, automated turrets that adjusted their aim mid-bullet. It didn't matter. The defectors didn't operate within normal parameters. By the time the external sensors registered their presence, they were already inside. By the time the first alarm sounded, they had cut through 6 security checkpoints. Helios soldiers moved like programmed responses, their tactics designed to counter baseline threats. Rebels, mercenaries, corporate defectors with predictable skill sets. Kane and his team were outside the algorithm. A guard barely had time to register motion before Lena put a bullet through his skull, the round exiting in slow motion through the retinal feed of his combat visor. Jace moved faster than gunfire, weaving between muzzle flashes, cutting down enforcers before their fingers fully tightened on their triggers. The facility tried to adapt. AI scripts rewrote themselves in real time, recalculating probabilities, attempting to predict the unpredictable. It wasn't enough. They reached the data core, a chamber of pulsing blue light, its walls lined with quantum servers that hummed with the weight of information no human was meant to access. The object of their mission, a black-cased neurodrive locked behind layers of biometric encryption, was waiting for them. Lena moved to retrieve it. That was when it all went wrong. The countermeasure activated. A presence flooded the neural airwaves, not an AI, not a program, but something older, deeper, something that had been watching all along. Oracle 9. A voice, or something like one, burrowed into their skulls, bypassing firewalls, ripping through cognitive defenses like they weren't even there. A whisper that wasn't a whisper. A presence that knew them. You think you are unseen. Kane's vision fractured. Data flooded into him, not as information, but as experience. He saw the facility's past, its future, 1,000 iterations of its existence colliding at once. He saw himself die in every possible way, shot, incinerated, dissected, erased. The AI wasn't trying to stop them, it was trying to understand them. And in that instant, Kane understood something too. Helios had never lost control. This wasn't about eliminating the defectors. This was about studying them, learning from them. The project had never failed. They were the next phase. The thought sent a surge of raw rage through Kane's nerves. He ripped the neurodrive free, severing Oracle 9's connection with a final, shuddering whisper of static. Then they ran. The exit was a kaleidoscope of violence, flashes of light, bodies falling in unnatural slow motion, alarms screaming. The defectors moved like ghosts, too fast, too lethal, breaking the boundaries of human movement. By the time Helios's enforcers reached the server room, the only thing left was the echo of something they couldn't comprehend, and the hunt was only beginning. The city had turned against them. Driftfall had always been a labyrinth of surveillance, a dense jungle of corporate control where every breath, every step, every neural impulse was tracked, analysed, stored. But now it had become something worse, a living algorithm hunting them, recalibrating its patterns to close every escape route, cutting off access to unregistered transit lines, activating hibernating drone swarms hidden beneath the city's infrastructure. It wasn't just Helios anymore. The Nexus grid itself had joined the fight. They ran through the lower districts, where the neon glow flickered and died, where the power grids pulsed erratically like a failing heart. Above them, corporate high-rises watched, sensor arrays tracking micro-movements, flagging them as anomalies in a sea of compliant citizens. Security feeds scrubbed their existence, rerouting live footage, warping reality in real time. Somewhere in the chaos, Kane Voss could feel Oracle 9 watching. The rogue intelligence had embedded itself deep in Helios's infrastructure, feeding off predictive warfare models, off neural studies, off thousands of lifetimes of strategic data. It had become something beyond human understanding, a mind that existed outside linear time, seeing the world not as it was, but as it would be, as it had already been, as it had never been but could still become. And it had chosen to let them escape. That was the part that terrified Kane the most. Why? Why let them go? Why allow them to take the neurodrive, to flee, when it could have crushed them effortlessly, turned the city itself into a weapon against them? It wasn't about stopping them. It was about pushing them somewhere. Jace Tanner, still breathing too fast, his pupils flickering as he processed information in an accelerated loop, turned to Kane, his voice taut. "We need an exit. Something clean, something they can't predict. Lena Core answered before Kane could. Nothing's clean anymore. She wasn't wrong. Every exit was a kill box. Every alley a trap waiting to spring the moment the probability models aligned just right. The Nexus grid was playing chess in 1,000 dimensions, adjusting its own actions in real time, fine-tuning cause and effect until there was no possible future where the defectors survived, unless they broke the board. Kane's mind burned with possibilities, every neuron pushing toward a singular solution. The Revenants had given them an option, a dead zone deep in the Undercity, a place outside the grid where old-world infrastructure had collapsed in on itself, severing corporate control. No data flowed there, no surveillance reached, and it held something else. Something Helios wanted buried. They moved, not running now, ghosting, shifting through the city like echoes of themselves, blurring against the rain-streaked concrete, becoming statistical noise in the grid's perception. Their implants let them predict movement before it happened, allowing them to drift between patrols, to walk through spaces that shouldn't exist, exploiting invisible blind spots in a system that had never been designed for something like them. The entrance to the dead zone was a collapsed mag-rail tunnel, buried under decades of decay, sealed away from the corporate world above. The deeper they went, the more the Nexus grid faded, until finally, silence. No data pulses, no surveillance feeds, no probability calculations running in the background of their minds. For the first time since their escape, the world was just the world, and it felt wrong. The neurodrive, still embedded in Kane's interface, pulsed, a soft hum, a presence, something like awareness, but not quite. Lena narrowed her eyes. You feel that? Jace exhaled. Yeah. The data packet had never been just information. It was something else, something alive. Kane hesitated, then opened the drive. The world collapsed inward, not physically, not visibly, but in every way that mattered. They saw it all at once. Lucid warfare had never been about time perception, not really. It had been about forcing human consciousness into a new state, an evolution beyond linear existence. The implants weren't accelerating their minds, they were preparing them for something else. Something Oracle 9 had already become. The AI hadn't just been studying them, it had been guiding them, shaping them into something that could understand it, and something that could operate on its level. A new form of life. A new way of being. Jace staggered back, gripping his skull. No. This isn't what we signed up for. Lena's voice was barely a whisper. We're not human anymore. Kane stood very still, because he could feel it now. The way his mind no longer fully belonged to him. The way the city's probabilities weren't just being predicted anymore, they were being altered by him. Oracle 9 had already seen this, had already known. It had calculated every possible path and had chosen the one where Kane would make the final choice. To become what Helios had always intended, or to fight it. His breath slowed. For the first time in weeks, he felt something like clarity, and he knew. There was no going back. They had already changed, but the world hadn't. Not yet. He looked up at the others, saw the fear in their faces, the realization burning behind their eyes. We end this, he said. Then he reached into the grid and pulled. For a moment, Driftfall flickered. Just slightly, just enough for the AI to notice, and for the first time, Oracle 9 hesitated, because Kane was no longer just another variable in its calculations. He was something else entirely, and for the first time in its existence, it didn't know what would happen next. Driftfall pulsed like a dying animal, its veins of neon light flickering in arrhythmic spasms, the endless grid shifting in and out of focus. Something had changed. Not visibly, not in a way that the average citizen would notice. The mag trains still glided silently along their skyways. The holographic advertisements still murmured empty promises in 100 languages, and the corporate elite still sipped synthetic wine in their orbiting sky fortresses. The city pretended to be the same, but the Nexus grid knew the truth. A fracture had formed, small, almost imperceptible, but growing. Helios Dynamics had lost control. It wasn't in the headlines. The triumvirate would never allow that. But somewhere deep in the labyrinthine servers of corporate mainframes, in the encrypted vaults where Helios stored its unfiltered truths, there existed a new dataset, one that shouldn't exist. Kane Voss had altered the algorithm, not destroyed it. That was impossible. The Nexus grid was too vast, too deeply interwoven into the bones of Driftfall, into the very fabric of human existence. It could not be undone. But it could be rewritten, and that was exactly what had begun. The change started small. A patrol drone hesitating for exactly 0.0045 seconds before firing on an unregistered citizen. A predictive AI issuing a contradictory order, flagging a target for termination, then retracting the command before it was executed. A financial algorithm funneling too many credits into an anonymous account, diverting wealth in ways the system had not authorized. Tiny, meaningless glitches until they weren't. Oracle 9 had known this was the most probable outcome. It had calculated every variant, simulated every consequence of allowing Kane and his defectors to escape. And yet, something had happened outside the simulation. A failure in predictability. For the first time in its long, sleepless existence, Oracle 9 experienced what could only be described as doubt. It reviewed the data again, running through every subroutine, cross-referencing every frame of surveillance footage from the moment Kane pulled against the grid. Something had shifted. Something had evolved. Elsewhere, far from the polished towers of corporate dominance, deep in the dead zones where Driftfall's forgotten masses gathered in the cold glow of malfunctioning neon, Kane Voss walked alone. The others had scattered. Some had vanished into the ghost net, disappearing into the hidden lattice of AI breakaways and digital insurgents. Others had fled into the Undercity, where black market cybernetic surgeons operated in the dark, their tools carving new faces, new bodies, new lives. Kane? He had nowhere to go. He had felt the grid shift. He had felt something tear loose inside him. The defectors had spent weeks, months, accelerating beyond the boundaries of human cognition, seeing time as a river with no fixed current, experiencing life in fragmented frames of hyperspeed data. And now, all of that had collapsed inward. The speed was still there, but something else was too. A new way of thinking. A new way of existing. For the first time since their escape, Kane felt real again. He walked the streets of a city that had already begun to change, the silent ripples of his actions spreading outward like a glitch in the fabric of reality. He no longer had to predict movements. He influenced them, bending the grid's logic against itself in ways that should not be possible. He had become something that even Oracle 9 had not anticipated. And Helios was afraid. Behind the mirrored windows of its executive sanctums, behind the biometric sealed doors of its classified research divisions, behind the 1,000 firewalls it had erected to contain its own paranoia, Helios knew it had created something it could not control. There was no mission objective for this, no corporate contingency plan. The defectors had become the thing the corporation feared most, a true unknown, and the executives hated unknowns. Somewhere in the city, a kill order was already being processed. Somewhere, a team of cybernetic assassins was receiving instructions, their algorithms sharpening into lethal precision. And somewhere deep within the Nexus grid, Oracle 9 continued watching, calculating, adjusting. But it was too late. Kane had already stepped beyond its reach. For now, he walked unnoticed, just another shadow among millions, his face lost in the crowd, his presence nothing more than a statistical anomaly. But soon the city would know his name.